I never thought my own twin brother would destroy my life, but looking back, the signs were there from the beginning. Growing up, we shared everything: birthdays, rooms, even the same face. But while he got extravagant parties with dozens of friends, I wasn't even allowed to bring classmates home. Funny how sharing a birthday can make inequalities so much clearer. Today, at 28, I'm a successful content writer, traveling the world and working with brands I once only dreamed about. Last week, I was even interviewed on local TV about my journey. That's when my parents finally decided to break their decade-long silence. Not with an apology, but with demands for money to renovate their house. The irony would be laughable if it didn't hurt so much. The same parents who ripped my bedroom door off its hinges when they found Snapchat on my phone, who believed every lie my brother spread about me, who threw me out based on his fabricated stories of abuse. They now want to benefit from the success they tried so hard to prevent. You see, in our house, there was always an unspoken hierarchy. My brother was the destined for greatness child, while I was the black sheep who preferred sports and friendships to constant studying. Every A+ he got was celebrated. Every achievement of mine was dismissed as luck. The only person who ever treated me like I mattered was my grandmother, who would secretly slip me a few dollars and my favorite chocolates when she visited. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was in the way my mother's face would light up at my brother's mediocre report cards while scrutinizing mine for flaws. It was in how my father would proudly show off my brother's academic certificates while my sports trophies gathered dust in the garage. But what broke me wasn't the favoritism. It was how my brother learned to weaponize it. He started small, blaming me for things he'd stolen, making up stories about my behavior. But then he escalated to something I never saw coming, deliberately hurting himself and telling everyone at school that I was abusing him at home. The bruises he claimed came from me were self-inflicted, but who would believe the family's black sheep over their golden child? Let me tell you how a teenager goes from having a wide circle of friends to complete social isolation. How false accusations can destroy not just your reputation, but your entire support system. And how sometimes the people who should protect you become the ones you need protection from. More importantly, let me show you how I rebuilt my life from the ground up, and why I'm finally ready to share this story. The thing about growing up with a twin is that every difference becomes a comparison. Every milestone, every achievement, every failure, it's all measured against your mirror image. My brother struggled socially but excelled academically, while I found it easy to make friends but had to work twice as hard for grades that were never good enough for our parents. If my story resonates with you so far, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world to me, especially as I share such personal moments. Let's get back to it. The rules in our house were never equally applied. When my brother wanted sleepovers, our parents would happily host his friends. When I asked to have friends over, I was told to focus on my studies instead. Every birthday became a painful reminder of this divide. He'd get elaborate parties with all his classmates invited, while I was lucky if my parents remembered to buy me a cake. My grandmother was my only ally in that house. During her visits, she'd notice how I retreated into myself whenever my parents started their comparisons. She'd find little ways to show me I mattered, sneaking me my favorite chocolates, slipping me pocket money with a conspiratorial wink. "You have a light in you," she'd say, helping me tend to her small garden during her visits. "Don't let anyone dim it." The control my parents exerted grew stricter as we entered high school. While my brother could have any social media he wanted, I was banned from all of it. When they found Snapchat on my phone, something every teenager had, you'd think they discovered evidence of a crime. They went through my phone, throwing things around my room in their anger. The next day, my father removed my bedroom door from its hinges. "You'll have privacy when you earn it," he declared. My brother, instead of showing any sympathy, used these moments to his advantage. If anything went missing in the house, he'd casually suggest checking my room. If money disappeared from our mom's purse, he'd, helpfully, mention seeing me near it earlier. Each lie built on the last, creating a pattern that our parents were all too ready to believe. The social dynamics at school were where things really started to shift. Despite my brother's academic success, he struggled to connect with people. He was awkward in conversations, uncomfortable at social gatherings. Meanwhile, I had a wide circle of friends, was invited to parties, and generally well-liked. The social disparity ate at him, turning his natural competitiveness into something darker. It started subtly. He'd make snide comments about me to his few friends when he knew I could hear. He'd deliberately embarrass me in front of my friends, bringing up humiliating family stories or making fun of my appearance. But what really revealed the depth of his jealousy was our 14th birthday. His friends, for whatever reason, didn't show up to his party. In contrast, my friends took me out for ice cream, making me feel special despite our parents' usual negligence. I didn't realize then how this contrast would fuel his resentment, pushing him toward more extreme measures. Looking back, I can see how each incident was a stepping stone to what came next. The way he'd study our parents' reactions, testing which types of lies they were most likely to believe. How he'd gauge which accusations would cause the most damage to my reputation. He was methodically building a case against me, piece by piece, preparing for something bigger. The whispers started small at first. He'd tell people I was spoiled, that our parents favored me, a laughable lie to anyone who knew our home life, that I was manipulative and cruel behind closed doors. But what made his lies so effective was how he mixed them with just enough truth to make them believable. Yes, I was outgoing and had many friends, so maybe people could believe I was secretly manipulative. Yes, I sometimes got angry about the unfair treatment at home, so maybe people could believe I took that anger out on him. Our parents' obvious favoritism gave him the perfect backdrop for his stories. When teachers or friends' parents saw how differently we were treated, he'd spin it as evidence of how I'd manipulated the situation, claiming I'd forced our parents to be strict with me because of my behavioral issues. The stage was set for something bigger, something that would change everything. My brother had learned exactly how to play both our parents and our school's administration. He understood that in a world of mandatory reporting and zero-tolerance policies, certain accusations couldn't be ignored, no matter how false they might be. The rumors started with a black eye. My brother walked into school one morning, the bruise stark against his pale skin, and when concerned teachers asked what happened, he'd give a vague answer about playing football with friends. But in the hallways, he'd whisper a different story to his classmates, about how his violent sister had punched him when their parents weren't looking. I didn't know about these whispers at first. All I noticed was how people started acting differently around me. Friends who used to chat with me between classes suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. Lunch table companions began sitting at different tables. The change was subtle at first, like watching sand slowly slip through an hourglass. The bruises kept coming. A mark on his shoulder one week, a scraped knee the next. Each injury came with two stories, the innocent explanation for teachers and parents, and the poisonous lies he spread among our peers. He was methodical, making sure the injuries looked realistic enough to support his claims, but not severe enough to trigger immediate administrative action. I only discovered the full extent of his lies when my best friend finally pulled me aside after weeks of growing distance. "People are saying you beat up your brother at home," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "They say you're jealous because your parents love him more, that you take it out on him when no one's watching." The irony of that lie, that I was the favored child, would have been funny if it hadn't been so devastating. The confrontation with my brother went exactly as you'd expect. When I begged him to stop spreading lies, he just smirked and said I deserved to rot alone. There was something cold in his eyes, something that scared me more than the lies themselves. This wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. This was calculated destruction. I wanted to tell my parents, but years of experience had taught me they would always take his side. Every time I tried to defend myself against his past accusations, they'd twisted it into proof of my guilt. If I got angry, it was because I was hiding something. If I stayed calm, I was being manipulative. There was no winning. The whispers turned into open stares. Teachers began watching me more closely in class. Friends stopped responding to text messages. Each day felt like walking through a minefield, never knowing when another of my brother's lies would explode in my face. The principal's office was the final battleground. Sitting there with my parents and brother, watching the principal's face grow stern as my brother spun his web of lies, I felt like I was watching a play where everyone knew their parts except me. My brother, the wounded victim, crying as he described how I supposedly terrorized him at home. My mother, holding him protectively, tears streaming down her face. My father, stern and disappointed, already convinced of my guilt. "These are serious allegations," the principal said. looking at me with that mixture of disappointment and concern that adults perfect for such moments. We have a zero-tolerance policy for bullying. My protests fell on deaf ears. My tears were seen as manipulation, my denials as further proof of guilt. The 10-day suspension felt like a death sentence, but it was nothing compared to what waited at home. My father started packing my things the moment we walked through the door. I remember falling to my knees, begging him to listen, to just give me a chance to explain. But his mind was made up. In his eyes, I was no longer his daughter. I was a threat to his precious son. My grandmother arrived like an avenging angel. While I sat shell-shocked in her car, surrounded by hastily packed belongings, she stormed up to their door. She didn't just argue. She threatened them with police involvement, with CPS, with legal consequences for throwing out a minor. It was the first time I'd ever seen anyone stand up to my parents. The first time someone had chosen my truth over my brother's lies. The drive to her house was silent, except for my sobs. She didn't try to force me to talk or eat when we arrived. She just made up the guest bed, brought me water, and sat with me while I cried myself to sleep. In that moment, I understood what real family was supposed to feel like. The 10 days of suspension stretched out like an eternity. Each morning, I'd wake up in my grandmother's guest room, the reality of my situation hitting me anew. No more home, no more school friends, no more pretending we were a normal family. My brother had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. He had completely destroyed my life as I knew it. But something unexpected happened in those 10 days. Away from my parents' constant criticism and my brother's manipulations, I could finally breathe. My grandmother's house became a sanctuary where I didn't have to watch every word, where I could exist without being compared or judged. She believed me without question, supported me without condition, and loved me without strings attached. Returning to school after the suspension felt like entering a war zone. The hallways that had once been filled with friendly faces now seemed lined with judges and jury members. I kept my head down, ate lunch alone, and went straight to my grandmother's house after classes. My once busy social life had shriveled to nothing, but at least I had a safe place to land each night. The isolation was crushing, but it taught me something valuable. When you have nothing left to lose, you find the courage to chase what you really want. I'd always loved writing, but had never considered it a viable career option. My parents had dismissed it as a hobby, insisting that only traditional careers were worth pursuing. Now, with their voices silenced, I could finally hear my own. College became my beacon of hope. I threw myself into my studies, maintaining good grades despite everything. My grandmother supported my decision to apply to schools far from home, understanding my need for a fresh start. Unlike my parents, she never compared me to my brother or questioned my choices. She just asked what she could do to help make my dreams possible. When college acceptance letters started arriving, it felt like the first validation I'd had in years. I'd done this on my own, without my parents' connections or support. My grandmother helped me navigate the financial aid process, and between scholarships and part-time jobs, I found a way to make it work. College was like stepping into another world. Nobody knew about my past, about my brother's lies or my parents' betrayal. For the first time, I could just be myself without carrying the weight of false accusations. I made new friends, joined clubs, and started building a life that didn't revolve around defending myself against lies. It was during my sophomore year that I discovered freelance content writing. I needed money and saw an ad for blog writers on a freelance website. My first job paid barely anything, writing product descriptions for an online boutique. But it was a start. I created accounts on various freelancing platforms, took every writing job I could find, and slowly built a portfolio. Between classes, I'd write articles about everything from pet care to travel tips. Each completed project taught me something new about SEO, content marketing, or client communication. The work wasn't glamorous, but every small success felt like a step further from my past. I was creating something entirely my own, something my brother couldn't taint with his lies. By my junior year, I had regular clients and a growing reputation on freelance platforms. I wrote during breaks, between classes, late into the night, whenever I could find time. While other students worried about finding internships, I was already building a client base that would support me after graduation. The turning point came when one of my regular clients, impressed with my work, recommended me to a major brand. The project was bigger than anything I'd handled before, writing blog posts and product descriptions for their entire website. I almost turned it down, doubting my abilities, but my grandmother's voice in my head reminded me that I was capable of more than I thought. That project changed everything. The client's positive review opened doors to more high-profile work. I started specializing in specific industries, raising my rates, and building long-term relationships with clients. By graduation, I had a decision to make: take a traditional corporate job or pursue freelancing full-time. The choice terrified me. Years of my parents' voice in my head told me that only traditional careers were secure, that creative pursuits were risky and foolish. But those same voices had once convinced me I was worthless, and they'd been wrong about that too. I chose freelancing. The first year was hard. I worked countless hours, took on every project I could find, and learned to handle feast and famine cycles. But gradually, something amazing happened. I started succeeding. My portfolio grew stronger, my client list more impressive, my income more stable. I could work from anywhere, which meant I could travel, something I'd always dreamed of but never thought possible. Being a digital nomad healed parts of me I didn't even know were broken. Every new city, every successful project, every positive client review helped rebuild my confidence. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I started a blog sharing tips for aspiring content writers, which led to speaking invitations at writing workshops and conferences. Through it all, my grandmother remained my biggest supporter. I'd visit her between travels, sharing stories of the places I'd seen and the work I was doing. She'd listen with genuine interest, so different from my parents' dismissive attitudes toward anything that didn't fit their narrow definition of success. The irony wasn't lost on me. The career my parents would have discouraged had given me the freedom and success they'd always claimed to want for me. Each time I landed a major client or received recognition in the content writing community, I thought about how they'd pushed me toward traditional paths, never seeing the potential in what I actually loved doing. My brother's lies had forced me to rebuild my life from scratch, but in doing so, I'd built something authentic, something that belonged entirely to me. The teenage girl who'd once been ostracized and abandoned had become a successful professional, respected in her field, living life on her own terms. Success has a way of drawing attention, whether you want it or not. After years of building my content writing business, things started happening quickly. A major brand project, one I can't name but everyone would recognize, led to glowing client reviews. When I posted screenshots of these reviews on Instagram, other content writers began reaching out, sharing my success story, spreading the word about my work. My college's principal noticed and reached out, inviting me to give a seminar about building a career in content writing. Public speaking wasn't my comfort zone. Years of isolation had left their mark, but I decided to take the chance. Standing before those eager faces, sharing my journey and insights felt like coming full circle. Students resonated with my story of building a career from scratch, of finding success in an unconventional path. The seminar clips started circulating in Facebook groups, catching more attention than I'd expected. Then came the invitation that would unknowingly open Pandora's box. A local news channel wanted me to speak about content writing on their show. They were doing a segment on modern career paths, and my journey from freelancer to successful digital nomad fit their narrative perfectly. During the TV interview, I talked about the importance of client reviews, how a simple appreciation post could open unexpected doors, and the realities of building a freelance career. I shared practical advice about starting small, building a portfolio, and maintaining professional relationships. What I didn't share was my personal history, the broken family, the false accusations, the years of isolation. This was about business, not biography. But family secrets have a way of unraveling when success shines too bright. The TV appearance spread through our extended family like wildfire. Relatives and cousins who'd never reached out during my struggles suddenly discovered my existence. You see, my parents had never talked about me to anyone after I left. For years, they'd maintained their narrative of the troubled daughter, the family shame. Now, with my success publicly visible, that narrative was crumbling. The first sign of the storm came as 6 missed calls from my mother. After years of silence, seeing her name on my phone screen felt surreal. When I finally called back, her voice was honey sweet, nothing like the cold tones I remembered from my teenage years. She congratulated me on my success, and my father, obviously sitting right there, jumped into the conversation, suddenly interested in my life and well-being. Their questions started innocently enough, asking about my work and travels. But then came the shift. How much was I earning these days? When I deflected, my father played the family card. We're family. You shouldn't feel shy telling us your income. That's when their true motivation surfaced. They were retired now, they explained. The house needed renovations. They had no savings left. Watching my TV interview had given them hope that maybe I could help them out. The same parents who had thrown me out, who had believed every lie my brother told, now wanted to access the success they had tried to prevent. My mother's voice turned plaintive as she described their financial struggles. My father emphasized family duty and parental rights. The irony was thick enough to choke on. They were appealing to family bonds they themselves had shattered years ago. When I questioned why they were reaching out only now, after years of silence, they became defensive. How could I be so selfish? Wasn't it my duty as a daughter to help them? Didn't I owe them for the years they'd spent raising me? They conveniently forgot that it was my grandmother who had actually raised me through my critical years, after they'd thrown me away based on lies. The pressure didn't stop with one call. They began calling repeatedly, their messages shifting between guilt trips and demands. Extended family members started reaching out too, urging me to do the right thing and help my struggling parents. The same community that had once shunned me based on my brother's lies now tried to lecture me about family duty. After repeatedly ignoring my parents' calls, I received a text message from my brother that finally pushed me over the edge. His words were like a time machine, taking me right back to being that helpless teenager. "Hey sis, it's been a long time since I saw you, and I can tell you that every day without you in my life has been great. I heard that mom and dad reached out to you and you gave them a crazy ultimatum. They are never going to go through with it. You know that, right? They clearly never loved you and they will never do anything to hurt me." Then came the confession I'd waited 15 years to hear, followed by a fresh attack. "I admit that I did lie about you 15 years ago, but it's been a long time since then. So stop being so selfish and try to move on from the past. You are unmarried and childless anyway, so why do you not want to help them out by paying for their repairs and renovations around the house? Do the right thing and be a better daughter." The audacity of his message, admitting to destroying my life while simultaneously demanding I help our parents, sparked something in me. The casual way he referenced his lies, as if they were some minor childhood prank rather than actions that had derailed my entire teenage life, made my blood boil. His attempt to use my single, childless status as a weapon showed he was still the same manipulative person who had terrorized my youth. But I wasn't that powerless teenager anymore. I had built a life despite them, not because of them. Years of writing had taught me the power of words, and it was time to use that power to tell my truth. I sat down and composed an email to my parents and all our close relatives. For the first time, I laid out everything. The years of favoritism, the oppressive rules that only applied to me, the door being ripped from its hinges over Snapchat, the systematic destruction of my reputation through my brother's lies, and finally, being thrown out based on false accusations. I described the contrast between my childhood and my brother's. His elaborate birthday parties versus my forgotten celebrations. His allowed friendships versus my enforced isolation. I detailed how my brother had deliberately hurt himself to create false evidence of abuse, how he had systematically destroyed my social life with his lies. Most importantly, I attached a screenshot of his recent text message. His casual admission of lying about me 15 years ago, followed by his entitled demands. The evidence I had waited so long for was finally in my hands, and I was going to use it. The email wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. About finally breaking the cycle of lies and manipulation that had shaped our family dynamic for so long. I ended the email by explaining how I had built myself up from nothing, with only my grandmother's support, while they had chosen to believe lies rather than their own daughter. After hitting send, I felt lighter, as if years of carried weight had finally been set down. I knew there would be fallout. My phone was already buzzing with notifications. But for the first time, I didn't fear their reactions. My brother's text had given me something invaluable, proof of his lies and the confidence to finally tell my story. The responses started pouring in immediately. My parents and brother sent a barrage of increasingly hostile messages, their true colors showing now that their manipulation had failed. But other relatives, learning the full story for the first time, reached out with shock and apologies for not knowing, for not being there when I needed support. 2 months have passed since I sent that email, and life has shifted in ways I never expected. When my parents' and brother's messages became increasingly abusive and threatening, I took legal action. A cease and desist letter from my lawyer finally silenced them. Turns out they only respect boundaries when there are legal consequences attached. My content writing business has flourished even more. The invitations to speak at seminars and podcasts keep coming in, establishing me as a respected voice in my field. But the real joy in my life comes from the time I spend with my grandmother, the one person who has stood by me through everything. Recently, I took a break from work to spend quality time with her. She's gotten into gardening lately, and watching her teach me about different flowers and herbs reminds me of how she used to slip me chocolates and pocket money when I was young. These moments, sharing meals, having heart-to-heart conversations, or just enjoying each other's company in her garden, are my most cherished memories. The relatives who reached out after my email expressing shock at what I'd endured, some have become part of my life. Others I've chosen to keep at a distance. I've learned that family isn't about obligation, it's about choice and mutual respect. I've started therapy to work through the years of trauma and betrayal. It's a journey, but I'm finally healing. My grandmother supports this too, understanding that professional help is sometimes necessary to process deep wounds. Looking back at that scared, isolated teenager who once sat in my grandmother's guest room, crying over a life that seemed destroyed, I wish I could tell her something. Your brother's lies didn't destroy you. They set you free. Free to build a life on your own terms. Free to pursue your passion for writing. Free to travel the world while helping others through your work. Sometimes, losing a toxic family is the beginning of finding yourself. The challenges they put me through gave me resilience. Their attempts to silence me made me a better communicator. Their rejection led me to build genuine connections with people who value me for who I am. To anyone facing similar struggles, your story isn't over. The people who should love you might fail you, but that doesn't define your worth. Build your life anyway. Chase your dreams anyway. Success is possible, and sometimes it's the best response to those who tried to break you. As for me, I'm exactly where I need to be. Successful in my career, at peace with my past, and surrounded by the love of chosen family, with my grandmother's garden becoming my new sanctuary of healing and hope.